Hey gamers, welcome to another episode of Bonus XP. Today we're chatting about Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem. And back from his closet stay is Bopper, letting him out so that way he can participate. And former donation person, streamer, ActualLizard. Welcome, guys.
Hey,
Hello. I don't remember, what was I in the closet for?
Oh, we let
Was I
we
put
let
in
you
there?
out to come out every like 2 weeks, so that way you can breathe and get air, And then actually, I think you might be free after this one. I don't think you will be. We can set you free. You've paid your dues.
I think that's good
Maybe.
because we really shouldn't be keeping people in the closet on RPGaymer.
Right. No.
Good point.
Well, I mean, I wasn't taking it that way. I thought I was like being like, caged like a wild animal or something.
Oh,
over
yeah.
Final Fantasy 13 opinions.
No,
Because you were like, no, get in it, get.
no. I'm just gonna run you over with my car for that one.
Okay. Could be walking back home from the grocery and just.
Again, as we talked about before we started recording, I completely agree with all of your thoughts on Final Fantasy so far. So maybe you'll play 13 again and you'll be like, I was wrong and RPGaymer was right, which is my favorite thing to hear.
That's not happening.
Okay, well, anyway, not about Final Fantasy. Maybe we'll have Bopper pop in for a few episodes on that, and he can be my bitch again. But until then, let's talk about Shadow Dragon and New Mystery. These I think are really interesting titles, just because of their, and I'm putting huge quotation marks around it, their success in terms of sales and what we saw. But I guess I'm curious about, like, when did you play these, and what are your overall thoughts on them? And you can split it up however you want to between the two.
Yeah, I played Shadow Dragon when it came out, and I hated it. It was for a long time the only Fire Emblem game that I hadn't finished because I dropped it midway through. And then a few years ago, I played it again, and I was like, oh, why didn't I like this? This is pretty good.
I'm actually with you there. Like, I played this when it came out too, and I was like, is this a joke? Especially coming off of, Path of Radiance, Sacred Stones, Radiant Dawn. It just was a very different vibe, and I wasn't there for it. But I feel similarly overall.
I would say I played it back when I was younger, but I only really finished it a few years ago. And then I did New Mystery after, because naturally I didn't play that when I was a kid because you couldn't buy it.
How about you, Bopper?
Yeah, Shadow Dragon was. I didn't play it immediately when it came out, but I played it fairly soon after release. It would have been, I think, the second Fire Emblem game I would have played, because I played Sacred Stones first, and then got really into it, and then Shadow Dragon was like the newest game out, so I got it like used from GameStop, and like Lizard, I thought it was a huge piece of crap. I thought it was like ugly and not very fun, and it just felt like a gray miasma when I was looking at it. So then I came back, obviously years later, maybe a decade or so later after originally trying it, to play it again, and then New Mystery was, I'm pretty sure not counting like Engage, was the last Fire Emblem game I actually played through and beat.
I honestly
And
didn't
that
even
one-
know it was the thing until you streamed it, like, maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago.
Mhm.
Yeah. I picked up Shadow Dragon at Walmart for $5 in that one bin where they just have random games. So if that kind of like paints the picture of how well it did in the US for sales. Yeah, I think the gray miasma is a really good metaphor for like the vibe that this game has, because we think of games like Sacred Stones and we have bright colored characters, and the palette just seems a lot more vibrant, and then you take a look at this game and there's a huge sadness to it. But I mean, like, I think a part of that too is they were really trying to stay true to the original, and just randomly fill in the blanks, right? Because I've only played so much of the first Fire Emblem, but it's aside from the side missions, it basically is a 1-to-1. Is that right?
Well, and reclassing.
Oh, true. Well, and so I guess aside from the little bells and whistles that they added, but I mean, like,
as far as
The map
maps,
design's very similar.
yes.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, since we brought up class changing, I think that's one of the biggest things to talk about when we're talking about this game. And I know, Bopper, that's something that you really like about this. Whether that is that more of a because of the wildness of the things that you can do, or is that just because it's mechanically a good idea?
Well, in general, I'm not a huge fan of reclassing in Shadow Dragon. I do really like it in New Mystery.
Okay.
Even though they're very, very similar. I think a lot of people dislike the reclassing because it does make a lot of characters feel super samey, because they already have fairly generic-looking portraits, and then they also don't have supports, and they also don't have in-story dialogue outside of recruitment for the vast majority of them. And some of them don't even have that. I don't know. How much dialogue Dolph gets, I'm not sure. But that everyone can jump between all the classes pretty much equally is something that a lot of people don't like, and I actually don't like it in Shadow Dragon. And I think when we get to New Mystery, we can talk about the differences.
I think you can go ahead and
between
talk about it here, because I'm curious too. Like, I didn't really notice too much different, but I'm curious what you're laying on the table.
So in Shadow Dragon, one of the big things that matters, and I know you want to talk about the difficulty of these games, but the only thing that really matters in Shadow Dragon is whether or not a unit hits C weapon rank. And that's like not even a hardcore meta thing. It's just like, okay, the good weapons are all that. So when somebody can do that and you can just move them in a class where they can do that, then you're good. Stats don't really matter a whole lot. Whereas in New Mystery, there aren't any like super overpowered weapons. You kind of have to use everything that you have. And the stat caps for each class really matter, even on the lower difficulties. When you start to get towards the end of the game, it actually is a serious consideration between going Swordmaster or Wyvern Lord or Archer, because all the different weapon types have their uses. The speed caps matter, flying matters, everything matters a lot more evenly in New Mystery. And so I think being able to move your army around into different classes feels more meaningful in that game, because you need everything. You don't just need like 3 warpers and the same weapons over and over and over again.
Does New
With
Mystery
irrelevant stats.
Does New Mystery suffer from the same, like, basically almost everything is hitting issue like in Shadow Dragon? Because hit rates are stupidly high and dodge rates are very low in that game, right?
Right. Both games use the same formula. Speed only gives 1 avoid in these games, which is what makes it different from GBA.
It hurts.
Plus, the weapon triangle is a pretty big deal in these ones.
Yeah. And it's very hard to take advantage of weapon triangle, and also terrain is like worth half of what it is in GBA. Like forests give 10 avoid instead of 20.
It's interesting to see how, I mean, with our probably limited playthroughs of the originals, because I think you played Mystery of the Emblem once, Bopper, right? Didn't you do a little stream on that?
I streamed it, and then I got soft locked, which is how I lost that Iron
No.
Man.
Oof.
Because I had no thief on the map, and my character holding the key died. So I got soft locked, but I have beaten that game, and I've beaten Fire Emblem 1 like 3 times.
How? You're talking about playing something like a Final Fantasy taking so long. I feel like that is one of the plottiest games you could possibly play.
Yes, but emulator speed up and then Switch speed up.
Okay.
So it kind of...
Fair enough. It's hard, because I think this game, when I think about it, and I think like of the originals, and looking up some of the games that were coming out at the same time, I know Shining Force 1 came out probably around the time that New Mystery came out, so you kind of see a little bit of the influences of what's going on, where I think it's just a game to be a game versus, the mechanical success that we see in a lot of Fire Emblems. I'm curious as to why you guys think maybe they didn't want to do a complete overhaul and why they wanted to keep as much intact as possible.
That seems to just be their design philosophy with these remakes. I mean, Echoes also, I don't think I like that Echoes did this, but a lot of people will say that Echoes was like faithful to a fault. That just seems to be the approach they like to take with these remakes.
Yeah, and I know New Mystery was also, I don't know if they went into it with this mindset, but it was, thinking of, I guess we're still in the year of Engage. New Mystery was the 20th anniversary game for the series, and they did market it as such, so I don't know if that played into it at all, as far as, they wanted to preserve the games. But generally, yeah, and I think if you look at wider Nintendo franchises, even the ones not developed by Intelligent Systems, it tends to be their overall approach to remakes. I'm trying to think of remakes that change a whole lot. Like Pokemon is pretty, they don't change a whole lot in their remakes, I guess, before Pokemon fans start listing all the irrelevant minutia, but they keep those very similar.
Somewhat. There are some things that they add, I'm thinking, I just watched Did You Know Gaming on Soul Silver last night, and some of the things that they do change are bigger things, with abilities and whatnot, and the split of the special attack and special defense. So if we think about abilities, those were things that we had in some of the prior entries in Fire Emblem. Even there's even rescue, you can't rescue anyone. It just seems like it's so stripped down that they took a lot of the joy out of playing, where it really just relies on to who is the best unit for the job, not what is the best way that I can manipulate the situation.
I do think that even with the staying relatively faithful to the previous games, the changes that they did make are fairly impactful. I'm playing FE1 right now. I'm doing an Iron Man of it. I'm chapter 15 or so. And the way that you play FE1 is pretty different than the way you play Shadow Dragon, even though the maps are the same. Because there's no reclassing. The enemies are just a lot tougher in Shadow Dragon, on the harder difficulties at least. So, in FE1, Martha's the GOAT. He's fantastic. And then you play Shadow Dragon, and it's just not the same. So, I do think the games play pretty differently, even though, on a surface level, it seems like a super faithful remake, right? A lot is the same, but the nuances they added change things quite a bit when you're actually playing it, I think.
Yeah, just the ability to trade items isn't just quality of life. It also just fundamentally changes the approach to, the entire second half of the game, where you can just, trade warps around and trade all your crazy staves around and just destroy maps in one turn, almost without any thought, depending on the map.
Oh, yeah, I think that's the only way I got through the final boss in Shadow Dragon, was just basically, there's no way I'm going to make it through this, so just warp Tiki and Marth into, is it Medius, is that right?
Yeah.
And just slaughter, you know what I mean? It is one of those games where it is cool how you can abuse certain assets like that. Speaking of which, in talking about how hard these games can be, I think especially slanting towards New Mystery being even hard on normal mode, kind of like what you said, Bopper. Why do you think this was the game where they had so many different difficulty modes available?
That's a good question.
And I guess I also want to know too, do you think it was necessary? Do you is there so much of a difference between them? Anything you got on the difficulty modes is good.
The only thing I can think why Shadow Dragon would have been the game where they're okay, we need 6 difficulties now, is that maybe they like realized that without like the supports, with less of the things that like a lot of people play Fire Emblem for, right? Maybe they were like, okay, then the gameplay needs to be real good, right? We need to provide more challenge, and maybe that's why they did that, or maybe it was just a change in philosophy of the dev team. I don't know any specific reason why Shadow Dragon, they were like, okay, we need to have 6 difficulties in this one.
Yeah, I don't know what it was specifically, although I think the fact that Hard 5 and Lunatic Reverse and New Mystery, I think that those are as difficult as they are does fit with the general trend in the series, because really from Talius on, there started to be an internal arms race for difficulty, because you have Path of Radiance, has Maniac mode in the Japanese version, which is way more difficult than any of the difficulties that most non-Japanese players would have dealt with. There's hard mode in Radiant Dawn, which is just petty by removing enemy ranges and all kinds of stuff and cranking up all the numbers. And then you go straight into Shadow Dragon, and I think they generally are getting harder and harder. And then I think the difficulty, I don't know if Lunatic New Mystery is the hardest difficulty in the series.
I have it as either New Mystery Lunatic or Awakening Lunatic Plus, personally.
Because immediately they follow New Mystery with Awakening, which has the most comical of all highest difficulties with Lunatic Plus, I think. Just the biggest meme. I don't know why. I don't know why so many, though. I don't know why 6 and not 3 as far as number of difficulties.
I kind of like that it's 6, though, because I feel like you can like start on normal mode or whatever, and then I think a lot of people, or I know a lot of people because I talk to a lot of people in the modern games that are like, they play on hard mode, but they're a little afraid of maddening. Or they play maddening, or especially in Three Houses, someone plays maddening and they're like, oh, hard's a little too easy, but I don't like maddening. I'm like, okay, Shadow Dragon has a solution to that, right? You have hard 4, you have hard 3.
Or you're me, where you're stuck on hard 2 getting obliterated by the second boss.
I think the problem is that would, I think as like an idea, that makes sense. I think with their implementation of it, the problem is that I think from hard 3 upwards, the strategies are all basically the same, because at hard 3 is when the enemies do hit escape velocity from your stats.
Yeah.
And you have to start doing all the like goofy forges and all the effective damage and all the warp skipping. I think the only thing that changes is just the likelihood of success gets lower as you get to hard 5, but I think the strategies are all the same. So almost like, I think if it were normal mode, hard 2, and hard 5, it would be, because hard 1 is a completely negligible difficulty because it's just normal mode without the prologue.
Yeah, really it's 5 difficulties. I mean, normal, I guess, is slightly easier because you get some training maps, plus you get Frey, but...
Well, it's messed up that none of the hard difficulties allow you to play the prologue. It's weird, right? Because in New Mystery, everyone complains about having to play the prologue every time, and then with Shadow Dragon, everyone complains about how you don't get it.
Well, you
so I feel
also
like it being
miss
an option.
You miss one of the best story beats in the game if you play Shadow Dragon on hard mode. Marth on the boat talking about like how he's a coward and he's gonna come back one day is one of the best cutscenes in the game, and you just don't get it in hard mode.
Yeah, I mean, if you just play hard mode and read the story, which is how I did it the last time I read the story, Marth just doesn't have as much of an arc because you lose that prologue. You also miss sacrificing Jagan. Which it's always funny because sacrificing Jagan is like what the game wants you to do for like narrative reasons, but you usually just sacrifice Gordon because it's funny. But or also like, because you have to get 2 people killed in the prologue, I think.
If you you have to get 2 people killed if you want Norn.
Yeah, which I guess gets into Shadow Dragon's most controversial thing, which is the mutually exclusive roster of characters.
Yeah,
I
think
it is
that's
kind
something
of
that
silly.
like,
It is silly to think that you have to lose characters to a certain point in order to get like equally mediocre characters, because it's not like any of those characters that are coming in are particularly good.
I
Well,
think
I think it's weirder.
the
Yeah, go on.
I think the thought process is similar to FE1, where they were like, okay, these are your replacement units, right? The idea in FE1 was that you would Iron Man it, or at least that you would soft Iron Man it, right? That like if people died, you would just keep playing and there would be replacements later. I don't think that really works as well in Shadow Dragon. Because in FE1, you get worse units later on, but they're still kind of useful. In Shadow Dragon, half the units you get, more than half the units you get, are absolutely useless.
Yeah, if you're playing on the harder difficulties and they start below a C weapon rank, just forget it. Just throw them in the trash. They're not going to do anything. Unless they're an archer, they're not going to do anything. Which I guess anybody can be an archer, but... I will always be upset at Shadow Dragon for making Thomas terrible after he's brilliant in FE1.
He's so good in 1 and 3.
Yeah,
like unironically
underrated
unit in those games.
Yes. I think he's underrated because people used him in Shadow Dragon and are like, he fucking sucks ass. And then they see him in the original and you just don't realize... What is it like in Fire Emblem 1? You get like the sniper promotion bonus is like +9.
So what it is
you
promote and you get the class bases, which for Tomas means he gets 8 to 9 speed.
Stupid. That is.
And he only needs like 1 level too. It's dumb. But Shadow Dragon, I think it also is made less interesting because you get generic replacement units anyway. I think it would be more cool if you're like getting blitzed. And then you get, like, the special map where Athena shows up or Ymir shows up. But when you already have, like, Loser and Whack or whatever all their names are just showing up anyway.
It also...
like
the generic replacements actually make it kind of hard to unlock the guidance. I did a draft...
Yeah, I've had that problem, too.
I did a draft recently where I drafted a Gaiden unit. And I was like, I guess I'm going to the Gaiden chapter then. And I missed it because I didn't kill off enough generics. Because, like... You kill off your units to get low enough, and then the game's like, here's generics, and then you need to kill off the generics to get to the Gaiden.
Yeah, you have to specifically kill people off in the map before you get the Gaiden, right?
Yeah.
You know, I wonder, I've never looked at it, but I'm curious if they thought that each of those maps were difficulty spikes. And then the Gaidens are like, here's free training and a new unit.
They are spread out.
Maybe because the Gaiden maps are also pretty easy. So maybe it is like supposed to be an opportunity for you to catch up a bit if you're behind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what people don't like. I don't know. I think it's cool to have mutually exclusive characters, but I also think Chrono Cross is cool in theory. So maybe I'm not the person to. To ask. I think that if they did a game where they leaned into this idea more, I think you could do some interesting stuff with it. I think as it is, because the stories of the Gaidens kind of have to be filler arc by default because they can't affect the main narrative because you might not get them, makes it just a little less exciting than it otherwise could. I think this might be a more interesting way to do branching paths in the future if they wanted to.
Like, just the number of units that you have determines the route through the game.
Yeah, because people don't complain nearly as much when it's like Bartre, Echidna, or... Well, I guess Corel Harkin is just stupid and arbitrary, but like a lot of the other route splits in these games do come off of, even if they're arbitrary, it's like you do get like some fun story and some interesting characters.
I think people think of it as you having to kill a unit to get the Gaiden, which people hate. When what it's supposed to be is, this is who you get if you're struggling and units died accidentally. Like, I don't think the game ever really intended for you to like, okay, it's time for the Gaiden, let me kill 20 characters off so I unlock it.
I think that's where they messed up, though, because you kind of have to do that to get them. Because you have to be, because obviously everyone's going to have maps where they just get blown up, but the fact that you have to specifically do it on specific maps just makes it so much more
it doesn't play well with the
them.
Generic replacement system.
Well, and you want to see what you're missing too. Like my most recent playthrough, you know, I don't typically see those characters, but I wanted to see them. I don't want to have to like just Google to see what they're like. I want to, experience them, and it honestly never felt worth it. Like, why not
It's
just
not.
use Navarre versus what's her name, the first one,
Athena.
Athena, thank you. Or like you already
Yeah.
have, and now obviously again, if you lose him, but if you didn't, like if you're just trying to like get the experience, what does it even matter? And Navarre is probably a little better trained than she'll be by the time you actually get her. So
I was gonna say because like I think this is an area where they definitely fixed it up going to New Mystery because, well, I don't think New Mystery has any. Does New Mystery have any mutually exclusive characters? Because can you get both Tiki and Nagi in New Mystery in the same playthrough?
Let me check.
I think because you can get all the sisters. I don't know because I know Tiki and Nagi are mutually exclusive, and then everyone else in Shadow Dragon, the Gaiden ones, require at least some of your named characters to die.
I'm trying to think too. I can't think of anyone.
But I think in New Mystery they cleaned it up a whole lot by making the Gaidens a reward for playing well. It was like, okay, you get this extra map and this extra character if you clear a certain turn count.
Doesn't
or
the
if you
prologue
meet certain
determine who
conditions.
joins at some point too?
No, you still get all of those units. They just join earlier,
Yeah.
depending on who you choose in the prologue.
Okay.
Or it's not even who you
Right,
choose, because you probably don't know you're making a decision most of the time.
Right.
Right. I guess characters are only mutually exclusive in the prologue, and then in the main game, they all just join at their default times.
I think that's true, yeah.
But yeah, I think the Gaidens just are cleaned up a whole lot in New Mystery because you get them as rewards for playing well. Like you get the risk map if you don't have anyone die in the prologue, or if you beat Chapter 3 in a certain amount of turns or less. So it makes it easier to get. It's more intuitive. It feels like a reward rather than you have to like intentionally grief yourself basically into getting them. And unfortunately, some of those guided maps in New Mystery are terrible, but I don't know. I don't know if the Shadow Dragon guidance suck. I've only ever done
The Shadow
the
Dragon
one.
guidance suck.
I think
Okay.
all of the Gaiden chapters are so tiny in scale, right? Like they're almost the fit of the screen. I don't think you have to scroll in them. And I think that makes them very like, I mean, even dangerous in a sense too, because there's not much room. If you're playing on a higher difficulty, you might even lose someone in these chapters where you're supposed to be picking someone up.
Yeah, like the Riz and Caesar map in New Mystery is basically a heroes map. And functionally it's like a puzzle of either how do you block these choke points well enough or how do you manipulate a one turn. It's sort of like your choices on that map, which gets into a lot of New Mystery sort of design philosophy where New Mystery is like turn by turn puzzles, because I think one of the biggest weaknesses, you talked earlier about getting obliterated by the second boss in Shadow Dragon. One of the big things that they fixed up in New Mystery is that enemies are still really strong, but they are not like power crept in terms of defense and avoid. So generally they just hit super hard, but you can find it's all about manipulating the enemies, and then if you can figure out your placement and you can figure out attack order, then you're good. You'd never have to. It's very rare in that game that you have to sit there and pray for RNG to work out the way you do in early game Shadow Dragon.
Well, you don't have to do that in Shadow Dragon either.
I mean, unless you want to spend 100 turns, 200 turns.
Oh yeah,
grinding
yeah.
out
On the
those first
one
few
boss,
bosses.
you kind of do, I guess.
I mean,
Yeah.
truly, he is
I'm
the only
specifically
hurdle.
talking. Yeah, I'm specifically talking about the early game bosses and then the late game warp skip bosses where you just have to like hit a 70 or turn the game off, because then you're going to get destroyed by everything because none of your units are good enough to handle any enemies.
Speaking of good units, one thing I want to kind of transition to in our conversation, especially like moving into New Mystery, is the first time truly you get to make your own hero. Which, I mean, I know you get to make Mark in FE7, but I mean,
Mark's a bum.
Right, he's not really there. And I know, for better or worse, the one fan hack that was made, it was cool that they tried to make him a playable character. I thought that was a pretty interesting idea. But this is truly the first time where you get to insert yourself in one of the games. but I thought it was done relatively well because they still kept the Marth narrative intact and you just kind of revolve around it. I kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on this kind of like forefronting the idea of inserting yourself in a game or a character you made.
I hate it
I
personally.
don't like this too much.
I will take. We'll run the gradient here. You really like it. Lizard doesn't like it very much, and I despise it. So we've got a full gradient here.
I think it just depends for me how heavily they're run into a narrative where you play something like Fates or Engage, where that character is you, and everything revolves around you, so you're just kind of this blob of things happening around you, versus here where I think you're just kind of a supplement to this story. So I think in terms of like that, and then also it truly gives you a character that you know that you can make a little OP, which I think is nice because especially in low growth Emblem, since they're mimicking the earlier ones, it's nice to have that one character where you know this is my guy, this is a powerhouse. So that's usually where I come from when I think of like anytime you get to make a character, how heavily they're in the plot. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say my beef with Chris is really only narrative. Gameplay-wise, I don't have a problem with Chris. He's a good unit, and you need a good unit, so I don't really have a problem with him in that respect.
I do. I wish the focus was on making somebody else stronger, and I know you can do that, but Chris sort of gets railroaded into being your best unit just because he's the only character available in all maps. You have to get several levels on him in the first two maps anyway, because you have to solo like prologue 1 with him, and then you basically have to get all the kills of prologue 2 with him because you only have Ryan for backup. So that's just like 2-3 levels he's picking up, so the snowball starts pretty immediately. I like Lizard, it's mostly narrative. I wish we weren't railroaded into an avatar being the strongest character. I know you can go out of your way and make other people the carries, but again, it can be difficult to do that with how the game is set up, especially if you're on your first or second playthrough and you don't know like the game well enough to power creep someone else.
Do you think a part of that is the choice you make when you choose his class at the beginning? Like, is it pretty evenly spread where regardless he's gonna slaughter, or is that pretty much if you're going if you're going fighter or what are they called, not hero,
Myrmidon or mercenary,
like he's gonna be really good?
I would say that long term Chris is going to be good no matter what you do. Beating the prologue is actually very difficult on higher difficulties.
It is. You kind of have to go either fighter or armor knight. You have to go one of the extremes.
Yeah, I believe there are possible Chris setups that cannot win the 1v1 in the first prologue. Go back and build a better Chris.
I don't know. Is it mage that can't win? Because
so it's mage can win, but I think you need to pick the right stat things.
So you can get the doubling, probably.
I've never tried Mage Chris. This is just, I've been told that this is true, and it sounds true to me.
Yeah, no, my problem though, if we're going like narrative though, just to address that is, and I talked about this a long time ago or earlier this year when I did the Corrin video. I didn't talk about Chris in it because that was specifically about Corrin. But the idea that like, at least, and I agree with this for myself. I know some people are going to feel differently about it. But the Aristotelian idea that we read stories not to have empty vessels for us to pour ourselves into, but to have characters that we can vicariously live through. I much prefer having a character that is a character in a story that I can empathize with, rather than trying to put myself somewhere in the story, especially because Chris, even though the Marth narrative is still there, Chris does pull a lot of energy. The Gaidens are all about him. There are some scenes where he does replace Marth, and everyone just is all over his body, just munching on him the whole game.
Well, that was actually going to be my question is because you brought up Marth, do you not feel like it's possible to do it simultaneously? Because I definitely see your point in the, like, you know, better to learn and reflect off of what someone else does than to find the person where you're inserting yourself into the narrative. Do you not think? Do you think because of Chris's presence, it's impossible to do that?
I think it's much more difficult. I think you're making, as a writer, I think that you make things much harder for yourself for no added benefit, other than the theoretical idea that some players are going to want that character to put themselves into. But like, self-inserts are on the whole fairly rare in games. I can't think of many popular story-based games that have true self-inserts like this in this style, where they have dialogue and they do drive the plot, where, you know, like, it's not a norm.
You're right, because usually
anybody that says they like it,
you'd be a mute protagonist,
it.
and you'd make the decisions of what they're saying and whatnot. So you truly, but you're just kind of, you're playing as Chris, but you just basically change their name and try to make it as you as possible. I get what you're saying.
Yeah, and I guess there's other non-Avatar lords that do the thing where everyone loves them and talks about how much they like them so much, but I don't know. Something about when it's like a self-insert like Chris makes it feel kind of cynical to me. Like, I don't know. I feel like the game devs are like, oh, look at you, Lizard. Aren't you look at how good of a boy you are. Don't you know we appreciate you?
Well, it also feels gross with some of the bad habits these games can get into, because when one character is a gross person, I'm like, okay, well, that's them. That ain't me. But when the self-insert for me calls Ryan a docile little brother, I'm like, hey, no, that is not me. That's not me, bro. Don't put those words in my mouth.
But you're forgetting the most important thing. Think of all the hats that you get to wear.
Okay, I do like the hats. You get to wear
a lot of hats. I do like the hats. The hats are peak. And you do get the Belf support, where Belf teaches Chris how to open doors. That's fun too.
So silly. Man, we didn't even talk about, like, the lack of supports in Shadow Dragon, and then the oddness of supports in New Mystery. They don't do anything in New Mystery, right? They're just conversations.
So
no, they have stat bonuses.
They do have the stat bonuses? Okay.
So the stat bonus actually exists in Shadow Dragon too. It's just the conversations.
Yep. Shadow Dragon has supports like Path of Radiance, where they activate if characters been deployed on the same number of enough maps together, but there's not very many of them, and they don't have conversations.
They're also hidden, right?
So it just happens.
Completely hidden. Yeah, you can. There's no way in game to even see that you're getting stat bonuses unless you are so meticulous in detail and notice, like, the little changes in hit and avoid that happen on the screen on the bottom.
But Bopper, no Fire Emblem fan has ever been like that to look into the minutia. Whoever would have time to do that?
No, especially in this game where it doesn't matter. It just doesn't fucking matter whether or not you use the, like, there are some instances, I don't know if I've ever seen anyone be like, you know what I need right here? I need that +5 hit, or it ain't happening.
I think it starts to matter when you really index on, like, reliability or whatever. Like, this is going back to FE3, but it works the same way in Shadow Dragon, where I was doing, like, the expected turn count run of FE3. I cared about supports a lot in that, but while I was doing it, I was thinking of, like, all right, in a normal playthrough, I probably wouldn't care about this.
Yeah, well, in FE3, it's also like, aren't they just automatic anyway? Like, you don't have to grind them. They work like Thracia.
You just get them, but, like, the values are similar. So it's like Sita sits next to Marth, and Marth gets +10 hit or whatever.
Yeah. So, I think the part, I almost hate New Mystery more for the supports. It feels like a monkey's paw moment. Everyone begged for supports, and then they gave us the game with the worst supports, because I don't have the exact number of supports in the game, but the overwhelming amount are locked to Chris.
Truly.
Then they're just by definition pretty terrible. Because I think there's like Marth, Sita, and then the White Wings, they get supports with each other. Beyond that, I don't know how many don't involve Chris.
I feel like this is exactly why these games are just not the greatest, because I mean we've said this a couple times now, or at least we've danced around it, where like what Shadow Dragon didn't deliver on, they tried to deliver on in New Mystery, and it was just the exact opposite of what we actually wanted. And I feel like that is kind of a carrying thought between this pairing right here.
I mean, I know we've been like pretty negative on the game so far, and I think that's because Shadow Dragon and New Mystery are really weird, and there's a lot of weirdness to talk about with them. Shadow Dragon's an upper half game in the series for me.
Oh, really? I was about to ask.
Yeah, I like Shadow Dragon. But I think the reason why it didn't do well is just because, like, the gameplay is really good to me, and I love the gameplay, right? But the gameplay is not, like, all that makes a game. I think people love Fire Emblem for the fun animations. They love the support conversations. They love a game that doesn't look ugly. So, like, Shadow Dragon, I think, does the gameplay right, and New Mystery does too. I like the gameplay in both, and then everything else is like kind of weird.
Yeah, well, and it's, again, if you're talking about one step forward, one step back, that kind of represents this transition period between, I don't know, something about these games feels transitory, like we're moving from two different eras. Like the animations, for example, I think they're super smooth, way smoother than like the GBA games. But they're ugly as shit.
So ugly.
Like, because on the rare instances where you do get to double, like where you retaliate on enemy phase, you hit like an archer, and Marth hits once with the stab and then the swipe up. You know, I'm like, oh, that's nice. Too bad it looks so terrible. And I don't think they would really get it down looking great until Engage anyway. Like just that smoothness with just a higher quality design. But
yeah, I don't think I liked Fire Emblem animations from Shadow Dragon all the way through to, I don't mind them in Echoes. I would say Echoes is the next game after Radiant Dawn where I liked the animations.
So where the horse kicks come in, because I have a problem with that.
Yeah.
Echoes.
Yeah, but you also have what's his name, Forsyth, that just grabs his shield and rams over people. So, you know, you give and you take.
I feel like these games kind of rank a little bit lower for me. I do appreciate the bareness in a way, because I know in these episodes we've talked somewhat about how if you have too many bells and whistles, I'm not interested at all. Aside from Three Houses, which is like one of the few games we haven't talked about yet. I like it there because it was kind of very much so ingrained in the plot. But you know, when we're talking about Fates and, you know, the hubs and all the little things that you can do in the hubs and how silly some of them are, that's too much for me. But then you have games like this where there's just not enough going on. That's why I kind of appreciate, you know, GBA era or you know, the Tellius duo, because you have enough going on to make it feel like this is a game and there's a little bit extra, but not so much to the point where it's just the wackiest, silliest sensations. So I think these games probably, I don't know, they're towards the bottom for me.
For me, Shadow Dragon is like really towards the bottom, and then New Mystery drifts towards the top. I really like the gameplay of New Mystery, although I will admit that this comes from playing the game a lot. It is definitely a game that I found that the more I've played Shadow Dragon, the less interested I've been in its gameplay, and the more I've played New Mystery, the more interested I've become in it. I think they have sort of reverse splits in this sense. I think Shadow Dragon has a very low skill floor, or a very low knowledge floor to enjoy.
Yeah, if you know any tactics game, you know Shadow Dragon.
The problem with New Mystery, I think, is that it's very, very obnoxious if you don't know what you're doing, which was me on my first playthrough, because the game, I'm not going to say it 100% relies on information that you just have to read off of game facts, but it kind of does. You have to learn how enemy targeting works. You have to learn how enemy attack order works to play it, even on like hard 2, but definitely above. But as I've grown familiar with those mechanics, I've enjoyed it more. So like the barrier to entry is stupid, but I think it pays off much more for me than Shadow Dragon, where I feel like once I saw the way you win, I couldn't unsee it, and
that's
every
like the
time
one
I
way
played
to
Shadow
do
Dragon,
it.
I play it the same.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a really good assessment there too. Like, I feel like everybody's playthrough, it's almost like Awakening in a sense, where if you're playing on hard or above, it's almost going to be the same, right? Like for Shadow Dragon, it's warp, skip, kill, warp, skip, kill. For Awakening, it's Robin, or just Robin, very likely, you know, just carrying the rest of the game. Once you do it, it's hard to break from that mold.
Yeah, but I think that's sort of true of most Fire Emblem games. I think the optimal strategy just becomes a little more obvious in like Shadow Dragon, but most Fire Emblem games have like a thing you should be doing if you want to like win the game most easily, right?
I guess that's true.
Like if you're playing Fire Emblem 8, Seth should be doing 90% of the combat.
But I think
but like people
characters are
don't do that,
balanced
right? Because it's not as
enough
fun.
like if you don't use Seth, you can still completely make it through that game. But I mean, but I know there was a lot of sabotage happening in your charity stream, but like it's still kind of you knew what to do to make sure that
That was because of the sabotages, though.
But
if we were just playing Awakening hard mode, we could have used whoever we wanted, and it would have been fine.
But I've watched a lot of streams, not anyone who's currently recording this podcast, of course, but of things just falling apart in some of these games and still relying on that strategy.
Nothing has ever fallen apart for me, so it's not me. I think for me, the difference, I think this is where like I have the difference. It's like all the games do have their kind of do have their meta strategies that work. I think for me, it's this weird combination in Shadow Dragon for me personally that's redundancy, because it's every map is approached with the same 4 steps. Mm-hmm. Warp Marth, Warp Boss Killer, which you want to Warp Marth first. You've got to get Seed of the support bonus, and then C's. Because when I look at maps, it's one super easy. It's the obvious thing to do. But then the maps, every time I look at the maps and I'm like, I'm not going to do I'm going to do a no warp run. Then I look at the maps, I look at the enemies, and I'm like, I'm not playing that map. That's where I kind of get the issue, because like playing, you know, doing Radiant Dawn and playing Alencia's Gambit suboptimally and trying to get all of the items, or playing Shadow Dragon where you're trying to like raise everyone. To me, that's more fun because I think the maps and the enemy quality is just more conducive to it. Whereas like trudging through a Shadow Dragon map where everyone's getting 1 or 2 shot, it kind of leads me to like sort of, I'm just going to do it this way because it's the path of least resistance. Mm-hmm. And I don't really want to play the map. And I think
it sucks the fun
that's
out, right?
the difference. For me, yes.
Yeah.
I know that's not obviously the case for everyone. It's not the case for you, Lizard, but for me,
no, I think that's like a fair
lies.
criticism, right? That like the optimal thing is really obvious, and doing it the not optimal way can be kind of painful.
Yeah. Because if you play Sacred Stone suboptimally and you train up like Gilliam or whatever, then all of a sudden you just have a really good unit that can do exactly what Seth does anyway.
Okay, I think a better example than Sacred Stones, because Sacred Stones is pretty easy, would have been like Radiant Dawn hard mode, right? Where you're going to be leaning on Soth to do a lot of your combat in the Dawn Brigade.
Yeah, I think what makes those feel more exciting is that like Soth does a lot of combat, Nolan does a lot of combat, Nyla, the Black Knight, is that like I think Radiant Dawn does a good aesthetic thing of like mixing it up, as far as like you're still using your big juggernauts, but especially early in the game, every map's got a new juggernaut. You know, chapter 1, you've got Nolan, he's your big guy, he shows up and you're like, oh, thank God, he kicks ass. And then Soth shows up. And then you've got the Black Knight, and then you've got Nyla, and you've got all these like there's a constant drip feed, or Toronio, there's a drip feed of new strong characters for you to rely on. And I think that even though it's the same thing in a broad sense, I think just the pleasure
feels a
that
bit
I
more
get as a
exciting.
player,
Well-
it feels more exciting and dynamic just for the face to be changing and for them to have story significance as well.
It kind of sounds
As to
like what
why
you're
they're
saying
there.
too, Bopper. And I think, did you coin the unit feel term? Is that
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like these games just don't have that at all. And I think that is kind of a part of it, where you're defaulting to the same strategy completely because there's no excitement of using the bland roster that comes in, because there's just no unit feel where you toss 7 or 8 at me and I'm gonna be like, okay, well, I used Sane last time, but I also like Kent, so I'm gonna drive all of my experience into Kent because that can be fun, because these characters have, even if they're minor personalities, it could feel good to use anyone, where I don't know if it feels good to use anyone in these two. And I think that's why when I say I like Chris, is because here you have someone that has a personality throughout the game. Because if it's not Sita, if it's not Marth, and if it's not Chris, then who is it?
It's Horus.
Frost.
Raiden.
Does that make sense though? Like,
No. I do think it's true that like Shadow Dragon has probably some of the worst unit feel. I would say, yeah, Shadow Dragon and New Mystery probably some of the worst unit feel in the series, right? Like, there's a bunch of units that you just do not want to touch ever.
Yeah.
I think it has like some fun units. I
them.
like using Barst,
Yeah.
Harden, Minerva, but like there's definitely a big cast of like scrubs that you just don't want to touch at all.
Because Harden and Minerva are like, they're built up. Harden gets one of the few scenes in Shadow Dragon. Although Harden is my favorite example of they were faithful to a fault, because they give you the silver sword. Like, give this to Harden, he's gonna love it. He can't use it. He's nowhere close to being able to use it. He's like 2 weapon ranks short of being able to use the silver
They
sword.
should have just given him the sword rank. What were you gonna do with that sword rank that was gonna break anything?
Yeah, nothing. I mean, it's the silver sword. It's really cool. Like, let him have his moment. Give him B swords. But Harden is cool because he gets almost like an in-game diegetic cutscene, because him and his like trash squad of, Roche and Violent and Wolf and Sedgar are all like hanging out in a corner, and you've got to get a move on to save them. It's one of the more dynamic moments, I think, in Shadow Dragon. And I think it's why people love Harden, and I think it's why that scrub squad specifically has so many fans. People love Violent and Roche, and they love Wolf and Sedgar, because all those characters and Harden all get like a cool gameplay moment.
Right, whereas nobody
where they're
cares
trying
about
to
the Media
survive.
Squad.
Right, they just sit in a jail cell and don't do anything. But if they were like having their own arc of like trying to fight off, or they actually broke out, more people would love them. More people would think they're cool.
well, I think that wraps up our discussion on the DS Fire Emblems. I want to thank you all for listening to us today, and especially our Patreon supporters for making this possible. Bopper, what do you have coming out in the pipeline here in the future, aside from maybe eventually inviting me onto a stream?
I have got... What do I've got? I've got a couple videos coming out. I'm still working on the Pokemon Gen 1 balancing video, and like how they created a complete mess with that game that makes it better. And I've got a Final Fantasy series retrospective that's going to be coming up, sort of an inverse. A lot of people do like the deep dive, the thorough look at, and then they talk, extensively about every single game. This is going to be like a brief look at each game, so like 10 minutes or less per game, all the mainline Final Fantasies. That probably won't be out for a minute, because I have to beat Final Fantasy 15, which I don't want to do. But otherwise, those are the 2 bigger projects that are in the pipeline right now.
I mean, you definitely know I'm here for that, so very excited. And Lizard will be back again here in the future. I think we're almost done this series. Can you believe that?
Yeah, we've done a lot of these, huh?
We still need to find a sucker for 3 Houses. I think every other game has been claimed, so...
Oh, I can find you someone for 3 Houses
We'll
if we
find
need another
someone.
person.
Yeah, and I'll I would volunteer for it, but you would just have 2 people because I'd sit there silently the entire time.
Yeah, you don't want to have to be present there for me gushing, and I know Speedy definitely wouldn't want that either, because that is a game I do understand why people don't like it, but I do like that game. I just don't like it as a Fire Emblem game. But anyway, we'll talk about that in the future. We want to thank you for listening. Now go out there and get gaming.